Hey church, great to be able to connect with you. We are in the middle of our mini-series Mountaineering with Moses, part of the base camp theme that we are looking at this year. And we're going to jump right into the scriptures in Exodus 3, 1-6. It says this: Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I'm going to go and check it out and see this sight. Why does the bush not burn up? When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Don't come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. What I want to talk to you about over the next couple of minutes is the theme of taking off your shoes and standing on holy ground. Now, the last time we saw Moses, Becca shared with us last week about Moses' miraculous deliverance from this genocide that the Pharaoh of the time was acting out against the people of Israel. Because of the bravery of Jewish women, the Hebrew women, Moses' life has been saved. Now, Moses then went on to grow up in the courts of Pharaoh. He was trained in all of the ways of the Egyptians. He grew up, but I'm sure that seeing the suffering of his people grated on him day after day after day. And eventually Moses took matters into his own hands. And the Bible tells us that he kills an Egyptian, thinking that the rest of the nation would essentially receive him with arms open wide as their deliverer. It didn't quite work out like that. And they basically turn their back on Moses. Moses realizes that he needs to flee for his life. And so he runs away into the wilderness. Or when we read the Bible, sometimes it can feel a little bit like bang, 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 event after event. But actually, when this moment happens in Moses' life, 40 years have passed. Moses was a young man, at the age of 40 when he left Egypt. I'm allowed to say that because I'm just in my early 40s. So Moses was a young dude and he flees to the wilderness, and 40 more years have passed on. And here he is on what the scriptures call the far side or the uttermost part of the desert in a place called Horeb. Now, Horeb is the Hebrew word for despair, desolation. So Moses is at this place of the uttermost point of despair. 40 years, he's probably in many ways come to a point where he's given up on himself. He's given up on his dreams. He's given up on his hopes. He's probably given up on any sense that his people will ever be free. I don't think that Moses was joyfully spending time in the wilderness looking after those sheep. I think that Moses probably felt like he was right at the end of himself. So it's so interesting, isn't it? Because so often we think about mountaintop experiences as being these great, wonderful, joyful experiences, and valleys being those moments of despair. And whilst Moses was physically on a mountain at this point, the Mount Horeb, he was metaphorically in a valley. He was in a low place. But you know what? It's so often those moments of despair, those moments of pain that end up being the border of our greatest blessing. They end up being the place where God meets with us in a powerful way. You know what? There's nothing from the scriptures that would let us think that Moses was seeking the Lord in this moment or doing anything that was religiously good. Moses was just going through the mundane monotony of his everyday life, and yet God broke in right at that point. And God chooses to speak to him in this amazing, dramatic way, a burning bush. Now, on one level, that wasn't particularly uncommon. It was quite normal in the wilderness, and still is today, for a thorn bush to spontaneously combust. That's quite normal. That can happen because of the intense heat and the arid, dry nature of the desert. What was interesting about this particular bush was that it wasn't consumed. It wasn't burning up. It wasn't ending up as just tumbleweed floating through the desert. And so Moses turns aside, the Bible's very specific about the fact that his attention is grabbed, but then he does something about it. God is constantly trying to grab our attention. God, through everything around us, through the miraculous nature of the ordinary around us, God is constantly trying to grab our attention. But what so often happens is we're so busy we don't actually bother to turn aside. I love the phenomena of things that God does. I love it when the Holy Spirit moves and people speak in tongues and people are healed and all kinds of crazy things happen. But that in and of itself is not the end. That's only a means to an end. That is to call our attention so that God can speak to us. I think sometimes we need to decide to not be so busy that we refuse to become inconvenienced to the point where God can actually then speak what he wants to say to us. And I love what God says. First of all, God says to Moses, Moses, Moses. He starts off with his name, and he doesn't just say it once, he says it twice. God is saying, Moses, you may have forgotten who you are. You may have forgotten your calling. You may have forgotten what I have planned for you, but I have not forgotten you, Moses. I've not forgotten what your name is. And God says it twice. I mean, throughout the scriptures, there are a number of times when God calls people and he uses their name twice, and it speaks of importance and urgency. Abraham, Abraham, Martha, Martha, Simon, Simon. You know, God does this over and over again to drive home a point that he knows us. Moses may have given up on himself, but God hadn't given up on him. And I want you to know today, you may have given up on yourself, but God has not given up on you. You might feel like you are at the back end of a desert, but you might feel like you're no longer pursuing God. But I want to tell you something today. God is still pursuing you. God is still running after you and running after me. And he goes on and he says, Moses, don't come any closer. Take off your shoes because the place where you are standing is holy ground. This is really, really important because taking off your shoes was a symbol in that culture. First of all, a lot of the poorest and most needy people, they wouldn't have had shoes in the first place. And secondly, if you were a servant with a family, particularly in Egyptian culture, you were not allowed to wear shoes. The removal of your shoes was essentially an act where God was saying, Moses, will you serve me? Will you surrender? Will you lay down your will and your desires to follow in what I'm calling you to do? And God asks the same of us. He asks us, will you kick off your shoes? Will you remove your shoes? It was also a symbol of holiness because it was this idea of being set apart for a purpose, for a plan. And so Moses, he removes his shoes. But there's also another beautiful thing about that. In most of those ancient cultures, when you went into somebody's tent, you would remove your shoes basically because it was a place of intimacy. It was a place of relaxing. And God was saying, Moses, you're in my house now. I want you to come close to me. I want you to be comfortable in my presence. But I want you to also understand that I am a holy and an awesome God. And so Moses removes his shoes. I've just got back from France and we had an amazing opportunity of being in a campsite there in France. And there was a big swimming pool complex there. And you weren't allowed to wear shoes or sandals or anything in that whole area. Now, most of it was fine to be able to walk on in that whole area. But there were parts where you had to get between different bits of the swimming pools where it was really quite rough terrain. And the things that I noticed about walking barefoot was that you are way more careful where you tread, what you tread in. You walk slower, you walk more carefully. I think God wants to challenge us, say, if you want to walk with me, if you want to serve me, if you want to know be ablaze with my fire, if you want to be somebody that I use to deliver a generation that is enslaved and in captivity, you've got to remove your shoes. But to do that, that means you're going to have to be careful where you walk. I think that God is calling us into a place of holiness where he's challenging us. Is what I am watching on TV really beneficial to my soul? Is what I'm doing with my spare time really going to help me be the person that God is calling me to be? And so Moses took off his shoes and he said, God, I'm going to serve you. I'm going to follow you. On the way back from France, as we got to the Channel Tunnel, there were a number of families, Hasidic Jewish families, and they wear the traditional clothing. They wear the talit, prayer shawl under their clothing. Their hair's not cut on the sides. They're wearing the head covering and all of those things. And immediately you know exactly what they believe because of what they are wearing. People would have known exactly what Moses' stance was because of what he was not wearing at that particular time. My question to us is, do people know what we're living for? Do people know what we are choosing to give our lives to? Because if not, then maybe we need to remove our shoes. Maybe we need to actually take off our identity and say, this is who I am. This is who I'm going to be. Moses would later say to God, who am I? Who am I to go and make a difference to these people? It was the wrong question, because God responds saying, it's not about who you are, it's about who I am. He says, when you go and tell them that I am sent you, Yahweh, where we get that name Yahweh from, the great I am. God is not looking for your ability, he is looking for your availability. He is looking to see if you will cover your face, take your shoes off, and to follow him. Finally, that bush is exactly the same bush that historians and scholars believe would have been used to create the crown of thorns that Jesus wore when he was on the cross. Isn't this an incredible picture? Jesus on the cross, crowned with thorns, ablaze with the judgment and the justice that was needed against sin and death and hell and pain and suffering. Jesus, ablaze with that judgment and yet not consumed, still calls out to me, still calls out to you in the middle of our mundane existence and says, will you turn aside and will you come and will you listen to what I have to say to you? Because I need you to go and to free an enslaved generation. So I believe God is saying to us, will we kick off our shoes? Will we stand on holy ground? And will we go? And will we say to the powers and principalities, let the people go? God bless you.